Programming, a massive component of personal training and also training in itself. So, of course, you would have learnt from your course, everyone knows that you have to progress, right? So, it's not too much of an issue, but everyone's going to progress by doing at least something, at least some form of overload training or stressing the body. However, what happens when your client has an imbalance, or what is the most efficient exercise for them to do? How do I fix future issues now? How do I overcome hurdles in even a novice's training? What happens when progression stalls? How do we program? There's actually different ways to drive that fatigue, or different ways to progressively overload. It's not just a 2.5 kilo jump every week, which a lot of people sort of get that gauge of, oh yeah, I'll just bump it up a little bit or do a few more reps here and there. There are a whole bunch of different progressive overload systems. Linear, like we talked about before, with the 2.5 kilo jumps. Non-linear, weekly undulating periodization, where you go through different weeks of high or low rep ranges. There's short block and long block periodization, where you sort of come from a whole lot of volume down into a strength block and potentially into a peak if someone's testing their max strength. You have ramping sets, where you will ramp up your sets throughout the course of an actual training session based off RPE. There's RPE training, where you teach a client how to gauge how hard an actual set was and base their programming around that. And you can even work with ranges or percentages then based off that, right? So, not to make it complex, but there are a whole different ways of reading how hard to push someone. So, it doesn't always mean setting a number for a client, and it doesn't always mean just a 2.5 kilo jump. You can base it off percentages. Advanced clients are programmed much differently to beginner clients, and you have to be a little bit more careful with how much fatigue you sort of push to the more advanced clients, because more than likely they can actually do exactly what you say. They're going to be able to do more than what you say, and sometimes it's actually about pulling back and letting your client know, okay, we've actually got to back it off here because we're wanting to drive future progression here, or we're wanting to reach X goal here. If we push too hard here, you're actually going to taper off when we want you to be as strong as possible, right? So, imbalances, injuries, that's another massive one. Even if you're not injured yourself, I'm sure you know someone who's injured that lifts or does sport, or especially does sport, because of a lot of stop-start, and we got to manage around those. What happens if your athlete's playing sport? Not necessarily athlete, client is playing sport, and you're wanting to program around their game days. Maybe it's off-season, you sort of push a little bit more into the strength and conditioning side of things, just in terms of increasing overall strength. Then when it's on season, it's probably going to have to become a whole lot more specific, and you're going to have to reduce that fatigue because they want to play well on game day, right? So that's what it's all about. More advanced athletes, it's more about tapering back as opposed to pushing more. And in terms of even beginner clients, you do have to be careful with how you program, because you're wanting to fix future imbalances. Be smart now so you don't have to fix it later on. It's a whole lot harder to fix imbalances that are made worse through training. It's not necessarily going to become worse, but a lot of the time, lifting a certain way with an imbalance and not addressing it will make that imbalance larger and potential for injury, and also a lot harder to unwind the issue versus doing it here. So, yeah, a little bit too in-depth for an overview, but programming is very important. That's the thing that the client is looking at even when they're not in sessions with you. And one, they know where their goal is, they know where they're aiming for. Two, they have that accountability outside even a PT session. So it's valuable outside PT also. Very important.